All right, on today's show, the Heat lose to the Clippers on Monday night, highlighting a major issue that continues to be a problem for this team. I'll tell you what it is and how the Heat can fix it next.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg, NBA media member and editor at allyoucanheat.com. Going solo, no David Ramil joining me today, but however you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Do it now. Hit that subscribe button, like the video, follow us on your podcast app. We really do appreciate it as we continue along with the season. But as this West Coast road trip continues, the Heat lose to the Clippers 121-104. They dropped to 19-14 and 1-2 on this 5-game trip. I've got some takeaways from this game, including why the Heat might need to make a change to the roster. But before I zoom out, just a recap of what happened in this one. The Heat, no Jimmy Butler, no Caleb Martin, no Haywood Highsmith, and no Josh Richardson in this one. But they were up by 14 points 2 minutes into the second quarter. They were doing a good job with Kawhi, with Paul George, with James Harden, limiting all the things that they try to do. Jaime Jaquez hits a pull-up jumper. That puts the Heat up 41-27, 2 minutes into that second quarter, at 9:52 specifically. And that was basically it. That was the end of all the good things for Miami. The Clippers storm back. Kawhi, Paul George, James Harden, they get going. They broke Miami's point of attack defense. They made shots against Miami's zone. The Heat didn't have any answer flat out. And I was really disappointed with their transition defense too in this one. The Clippers scored 19 fast break points, but really this just came down to Kawhi making shots, 24 points for him. Paul George, 23 points for him. Both of them shoot over 50% in this one. Big during that comeback there. The Heat had only one player score 20 points. That was Bam. He had 21. And after the Heat went up by 14 in the second quarter, again, after that Jaime jumper, they got outscored 94-63 the rest of the game. So this one wasn't even close. This one really wasn't even as close. The final score didn't look very close, but it was probably not even as close as that final score was, just because of how much the Clippers just thoroughly dominated down the stretch. Now, the Clippers are a good team. They got Kawhi back after he had missed a few games, and he looked great. The Heat were obviously missing their important guys, but defense is becoming an issue here. And after the game, Eric Spoelstra, Kyle Lowry, those guys talked to the media and talked about point of attack defense and how this team needs to be better defensively. They are right now 13th in defensive rating. I've got some other stats that I want to get to here in a second as we zoom out, but specifically in this one, Kawhi and Paul George and James Harden just attacked Tyler Hero over and over and over again. And that's going to happen, right? Those guys, Kawhi, like big predatorial type of wings, strong guys, they're going to just go after the smallest guy on the other team. And a lot of times that's been Tyler Hero. Sometimes it's Kyle Lowry. Sometimes it's somebody else. And I don't think that is necessarily a problem with Tyler Hero. I don't think that there's anything you could do when Kawhi is playing like this. And he's been playing awesome for the Clippers. Basically, after the James Harden trade, it took him a few games to get things settled there for them. And then after that, he's been playing great. And I know he's just missed a few games, but he's back and he looks awesome for them. Paul George is predictably great. And the James Harden thing is working out too. And so it would be pick and roll with James Harden, and he would get into the teeth of the defense again because that point of attack defense just wasn't there. So it was either Kawhi getting into the low post or James Harden running pick and roll with Zubac, and they would just get into the paint and either just score. And a lot of times they just scored. They didn't even bother with the kick out. And then when they did kick out, you had Norm Powell on the second side scoring off of a scrambled defense. Powell had another good game for them too. He had 22 points off the bench on 9 of 11 shooting. And so it was like, okay, if you were lucky enough to stop Kawhi or James Harden on one possession, those guys would just kick it out to Norm Powell, and then he would score. He shot 82% in this game. So you had that. The Heat only turned the ball over 13 times, but it felt like they could never really get back on defense after the turnovers. And the Clippers scored a bunch of points off of turnovers in this one. they, again, attacked Tyler Hero. Jamal Cain was in the starting lineup with no Jimmy Butler. They went after Jamal Cain. They went after Kyle Lowry. They went after Jaime Jaquez Jr. quite a bit in this one. And I think with all the Jaime hype, we forget that he's a rookie and he's further along offensively than he is defensively. And I think a lot of Heat fans might overlook that because you look at the way that he plays and the way that he carries himself more specifically and his size and all these things and the whole, oh, he's 22 years old, he's ahead of his time. And all that stuff is very true. But defensively, he could still get beat. Like when you're going up against Kawhi or Harden or a professional scorer like Powell or Paul George, like you're just going to get beat. And those guys just went at Jaime, who is still a rookie, and he's going to get beat on that end. So he wasn't great in this one either. I don't know how much it would have mattered. I mean, obviously it would have mattered if you had Jimmy Butler in this one. But his point of attack defense hasn't been great all season long either. Caleb Martin, like, I don't know what's going on with him. I think that there's still some injuries. I mean, obviously he missed this game because of injury, but even when he's on the court, he never looks 100% healthy. And I just wonder, I'm like, his point of attack defense hasn't been great either. And the best guy, I think, the most consistent defender Miami's had on the perimeter has been Haywood Highsmith. He got good news on him, by the way. It was a jaw issue, not like a concussion, even though he went in the concussion protocol, cleared that. He should be back at some point, but nope, there's no timetable on him either. And without him, I just don't know who the best perimeter defender on this team is, who you can consistently rely on. The Heat are even taking Kyle Lowry. Spo likes to just kind of play, let guys guard their positions, but he's starting to do that a little bit less as his issues crop up. Kyle Lowry was just sort of like the down man a lot in this game and wasn't awesome on rotation or help side defense. They had to use Thomas Bryant quite a bit. They went to two big lineups with Bam and Kevin Love, and those lineups are just going to get beat, especially against a pace and space team like the Clippers. So again, there's just a lot of things that they don't have on the table because of the injuries. But you see Spo going to the zone in this game a lot, and the Clippers, it might have been a couple possessions where they had a problem with it, and then they just figured it out. And again, credit them. They made shots. Like Kawhi made a couple of pull-up threes. Paul George made a couple of pull-up threes late that basically just broke Miami's zone. But I tell this to people all the time when it comes to the Heat zone. It's a fun wrinkle. It's an interesting thing. They're basically trying to turn a bug in the system into a feature, right? The Heat don't go to zone because they think that zone is some strategic advantage inherently. They're going to zone because they don't have good one-on-one defenders, whether it's because of injuries or because of the lineups that they're playing or whatever it is. They don't have a ton of size on this roster either. And so they're going to a zone out of necessity, not because they think it's some sort of trump card, right? That's not what this is. It's because they have to, and the Heat went to it in this game because they had to, and the Clippers broke it, and that was Miami's kind of last kind of play. That was kind of their last move, and it didn't work. And like I said, that's why you get outscored 94-63 down the stretch in this game. 19 fast break points for the Clippers. That wasn't good either. And just going back to the quotes there, like Spoelstra is going to say every time he's asked about the injuries, he says, basically paraphrasing here, but next question. Like he's just not going to talk about it. He doesn't want to publicly provide any excuses. And I get that as a motivating tactic, but it's a real thing that these injuries are continuing to pile up. The Heat are 4th or 5th last I checked on Spotrack's games missed. It's I think 100 games missed due to injury now. And unlike last year, where the injuries were, you lost like Victor Oladipo for a long stretch of the season. Well, he wasn't really an important part of the rotation anyway. Now it's Bam for 7 games, Tyler Hero for 17 games. It's Jimmy Butler now for 4 or 5 games in a row. So like the injuries now that they're dealing with as opposed to last season are much more impactful. I think there's things that the Heat can feel good about. I think that there's definitely some offensive things that I like a lot. I think their depth overall has stepped up. They got a big win in Golden State to start the road trip. They lost against Utah over the weekend, and now they lost against the Clippers in LA. They do have another game coming up against the Lakers in LA, and then they wrap up the trip against Phoenix. But those are big wings that they're going up against in LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker. We'll see if Bradley Beal plays. You never know with him, but there's going to be some problems coming up, some real tests for Miami's defense. So we're going to zoom out on some of those defensive issues. I got some key stats that I want to get to. And then, I don't know, there's a name out there. I promised we wouldn't do trade talks right away, But I'm already breaking my New Year's resolution. That's going to come up a little bit later in the show. But first, let's talk about our friends at Prize Picks. Today's episode of Locked On Heat is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of betting against thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. With basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and receptions. If you want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, you can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. All you got to do is go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Again, tune in with us, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on your favorite podcast app. Make sure you are liking the videos on YouTube and leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app of choice. All right. So let's zoom out on some of these defensive issues that I hinted at before. Miami, right now, 13th in defensive rating in the NBA. That's slightly above average. They're giving up about 1 more point per 100 possessions than they did last year. But that's not good enough. That's not good enough for the Heat. When they're not, they have a pretty firm ceiling of what this team could be offensively. And to be honest, shooting almost 40% from 3-point range this season is kind of bailing out a lot of their other roster issues. The injuries being maybe the number one thing, but defensively, I think that we need to start talking about this unit and just stop assuming that because it's the Miami Heat that they're just going to be good defensively. I don't know that they're going to be there. I think against certain teams they look great. In certain matchups they're fine. But when you're going against some of the more talented teams, like the Clippers, for instance, on Monday night, like you're going to do against the Lakers and against the Suns coming up, and even when you have Jimmy and Haywood and Caleb and those guys, there is a real concern about what this unit can do against the other top offenses in the NBA. And it starts at their point of attack. And you listen to this team talk about their defensive issues, and it's always about the point of attack. It's always about the point of attack. Kyle Lowry was asked point blank in the locker room after the game on Monday night, what can you do? What can you do when the point of attack defense has been this bad against the Clippers and basically for the entire season? And, he did his best to give an answer, but he basically just said, hey, we just got to guard our man. We just got to find a way to guard our man. And, he gave credit when you're going up against a guy like Kawhi and Paul George, they're just going to make shots, and that's going to happen. And, he made the point, like those guys, when you're even going against faster guys like not faster like James Harden, but, more drive and penetrate kind of guys like James Harden, who are doing it at a high level, they're just going to open you up. They're going to get you flat-footed. They're going to play the angles. And you just got to – the way that defense is played right now and, with the lack of hand checking and the freedom of movement and all that stuff, like that stuff is just going to happen. But Kyle Lowry at the end of his statement basically said, we just got to find a way to guard our man. And the Heat just aren't doing it. And I don't know that they need to stop the opposing ball handler from scoring. There just needs to be more friction. There needs to be more of a fight at that point of attack, whether it's from the first guy up or whether it's from the help on the nail or from somebody rotating up from under the basket. Something else has got to happen. And Miami, they have good one-on-one defenders. I don't know that they have an elite one-on-one defender unless you're talking about like Jimmy Butler in the playoffs when he really cares, or even in the fourth quarters when he really wants to lock in, but just like a 48-minute elite defender, Haywood Highsmith might be the closest guy to that. And I don't know that most teams would consider him that. I think he's a great perimeter defender, but we're also not talking about like Pete Kawhi in San Antonio or even like OG Anunoby, who just got traded to the Knicks. And the Knicks are making a move because they felt like they needed that. They needed somebody like that on the perimeter. And you look at who's in the Eastern Conference, whether it's Milwaukee with Giannis and Damian Lillard, or Philadelphia with Tyrese Maxey at the point of attack, or obviously Boston with Tatum and Derek White and Jaylen Brown and all those guys. Like Miami, when it comes to the playoffs, are going to have a hard time stopping these guys. And even if we're looking at a guy like Haywood Highsmith being your defensive specialist, your ace, are they starting Haywood Highsmith anymore? Offensively, is he giving you enough in a playoff series that you could even keep him on the floor? Or our opposing defense is just going to play off of him and pack the paint? Now you have some offensive issues. So you not only need a guy who could defend at the point of attack at a high level, you need a guy who could stay on the court in a playoff series and play real minutes and contribute something offensively. You need a great two-way player. And the Heat have that in Jimmy Butler, but they don't really have and I'm talking about perimeter guys, so I'm not including Bam in this, and Bam is good when he gets switched on to guys, but you don't necessarily want him always guarding the perimeter guy either, or a ball handler or a wing, because he's your only big man in most of these lineups. So you need him by the basket guarding the other opposing big man. And so that's the roster construction is a flaw. Even if the Heat have depth, it's just getting to the right lineups at the right time and starting the right players and making sure that they're not negatives offensively. So all those things are an issue. Here's the other problem. Beyond just the roster construction, beyond the lack of athleticism or size or an elite perimeter stopper, there is some effort stuff here that is a little troubling. The Heat are 25th in transition defense per cleaning the glass. That is a bad number. And that is not a number that we are accustomed to seeing from the Miami Heat. And Eric Spoelstra has mentioned transition defense here and there. He talked about it a little bit after last night's game. It's coming up more now when you listen to him talk. That's an effort thing. And some of it is a structural schematic thing. Like Miami, they need to sort of strategically crash the offensive boards because part of Miami's formula this year in winning games is just creating more opportunities, creating more possessions for themselves, whether that's forcing turnovers or crashing the offensive glass or limiting turnovers on their own. All that kind of stuff goes into that pot, and they need to come out the other side of the game with more possessions, more chances than the opposing team. And then obviously what that does is it limits chances for the opponent also. So that's part of their formula. But you have to be very careful when you crash the offensive glass, because now you're letting if you don't get the offensive rebound, you're behind the play now. You're behind the defensive play now. And look, the Heat, and the Heat aren't unique in this. When you have guys crash the glass, other guys are pinpointed as, okay, you get back while I crash the glass. And the Heat have been really good about being opportunistic and crashing and knowing, okay, you're crashing, I'm getting back. They've been really good about that over the years, and it's really helped them get extra possessions that are important, especially late in games. But this year, it just seems a little off. And I do wonder how much the injuries are at play here, because instead of having those designations and that communication of you crash, I get back, sometimes it just feels like they don't really know who's supposed to crash, who's supposed to get back. And again, there's injuries. They're playing a ton of different lineups. They've used like 20 different starting lineups in this season. And when you're relying on guys who don't play a lot, whether it's RJ Hampton or Jamal Cain or these guys, it's not necessarily their fault, but because they don't play a lot with these guys, there's no real chemistry, and communication becomes so much more important. But you're trying to do all that in the flow of the game while you're trying to score, while you're trying to get stops, while you're probably a little bit frustrated that you're not getting those stops and that these blow-bys are happening at a rate that is just too high, and you're getting frustrated and annoyed because of that. It's tough. In other words, it's tough. But they need to clean it up. They need to figure it out. They haven't had a ton of time to practice. I would imagine they're probably going to practice at some point when they get back from this trip. But their transition defense needs to be an area of focus. Getting guys back is obviously going to be helpful. Caleb Martin is a very good transition defender. Jimmy Butler is a very smart and well-placed transition defender. But even in last night's game, it would just be like Tyler Hero would be the last man back, and it looks bad on Tyler because he's the one getting blown by, but he's the only help because everybody else is behind the play. So that's part of it. There's also, inherent, hey, sometimes they just throw the ball over the top of Kyle Lowry even when he gets back. Sometimes Kevin Love is just slow to get back because he's just a slower player and he can't keep up with some of the faster players. in the league. And so there's just a lot of those issues too. So the Heat need to clean up the transition defense. And I think if they do that, you'll start to see their defensive rating nudge up a little bit more. But even when you do that, I still have some overarching, zoomed out concerns about this defense, especially when we're talking about what they can do against some of the best teams in the Eastern Conference in a playoff setting. Can they make a trade to address that issue? We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Heat. Today's episode of Locked On Heat is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still some time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use. There's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. Find bets in the new Explore tab. Make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays. And if you're not betting parlays, I mean, that's the next step. And it can get really exciting. You just sort of link a bunch of games throughout the day. You got a lot on the line. Just add a little bit more sizzle to your game days. So you could do the popular parlay hub. You could do all that. FanDuel has all of that stuff and more. If you want to bet on end of season awards, you can find that as FanDuel as well. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. If you're still watching on YouTube, hit that like button. Leave us a comment. Let us know where you're watching from, what you think about Miami's perimeter defense. Do they need to make a trade? Is there an answer on this roster? Are you less concerned just because of all the injuries? Are you more concerned because it feels like all these injuries are a constant for the Heat this season? Let us know in the comments, and make sure that you follow us and download the podcast where you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Odyssey app, and wherever else you tune in. Let's talk about Dejounte Murray. We haven't talked about him a lot on this show just because I don't really know if he's the guy that the Heat need when you're talking about players that the Heat would realistically look at to acquire either before the trade deadline in February, which is like, hey, it's January now. We're talking about like a month and a half away. So trade stuff is picking up, and we just saw a trade happen over the weekend. The Knicks and the Raptors. The Knicks get OG Anunoby. The Raptors get RJ Barrett, Canadian native. They get Emmanuel Quickly in a move that I really like for the Raptors, and I'm a little, it's okay. It's okay for the Knicks, I guess. They got the player that they wanted. Anunoby seems like a Tibbs guy, so good for them. Kind of a win-win deal. But if you're the Heat and you're looking around, you're saying, okay, trades are happening. You don't see December trades happen a whole lot, but it feels like teams just know what they need. And it feels like the bottom of the league and the teams that are just sort of out of it know earlier than they usually know. And so they might be sellers earlier in the season than they might be. So just because the deadline is in February does not mean we can't start talking about trades right now on January 2nd, because stuff's happening. Stuff's already happening. And Dejounte Murray from the Hawks is reportedly available. The Hawks, it's been a disappointing year for them. They're not where they want to be. It is very obvious the Trae Young, Dejounte Murray backcourt does not work. It never really worked. I never really loved that fit in the first place. And I don't know that they're ready to blow it up completely and trade the franchise player that's Trae Young, even if you want to argue that they should. It just doesn't feel like that front office is ready to make that kind of move. But you can flip Dejounte Murray and try to retool. There's other guys too. Like DeAndre Hunter is another name that I would look at if I'm Miami or if I'm another team that could be gotten from Atlanta. But DeAndre Hunter, Dejounte Murray, they're reportedly available. And the Dejounte Murray thing is interesting to me because when he was in San Antonio before the Hawks traded a couple of first-round picks for him, when he was in San Antonio, he was an all-star, 20-point-per-game scorer, but also a really good defender at the point of attack on the perimeter. And this is what we're talking about, right, is Miami's specific issue. And if teams are just going to attack Tyler Hero, and if they are going to attack Kyle Lowry because of just his size and the fact that he's 37 years old, and you're always going to get them attacking, the other obvious, like the Duncan Robinsons and the Jaimes and those kinds of guys. I do wonder if you just need to go ahead and make a roster move and go get a guy who you can plug in on the perimeter and say, okay, you're our new point of attack defender. We don't have to overthink this. We don't have to mix up our matchups. You're a great point guard at the point of attack. Go out there, guard your position. Dejounte Murray is long. and he has been a very good defender before. He has not been an awesome defender recently in Atlanta, but it's not been a great situation in Atlanta either. And I don't know that if you're playing next to Trae Young, you're the most motivated either to give it your all defensively, because you know that he's not doing it either, and he's the leader of the team. I think Dejounte Murray has the talent. There's no doubt about that. That's why the Hawks traded for him in the first place, is they thought, okay, this is a guy who can defend other point guards because we don't trust Trae Young to do it in the first place. And now I am a little concerned that he's not doing that for Atlanta, but the Hawks have had like 3 different coaches over the last 3 years. It's been a complete mess there. I think if you put Dejounte Murray in Miami and had Eric Spoelstra coach him and had him be accountable to guys like Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo in that locker room, I think you would see something a lot closer defensively to what Dejounte Murray was in San Antonio than what he's been over the last couple of years in Atlanta. I think that very strongly. I think scenery, setting, accountability, coaching, all that stuff absolutely matters. The question is he what Miami needs, and is he worth what it takes to give up? Especially if you're talking about, okay, he's not really a whale. I think Dejounte Murray is a good player. I don't think he's an all-star. I think he's closer to what Derek White is, which, by the way, is a very good player for Boston. And if you can get something like that in Miami, that moves the needle in a meaningful way. And the point of attack defense is so bad at this point that it feels like when you talk about problem solving in general, I always sort of ask myself, like, okay, what's one thing that I can do that fixes a bunch of other problems that I might have in my day, all right, or something that I have going on with work or in life? Like, what's one thing I could do? If I just do this one thing, does this solve these other 2 problems, or does it mitigate these other 2 issues that are going on a little bit more, where they're not as big of a problem? And I think Miami's version of that is the point of attack defense. If you get a guy who can credibly guard other ball handlers and wings, I think that solves a lot of Miami's issues defensively. I think it solves a lot of their matchup issues. It solves some of the transition stuff. If you're getting a talent like that who can just get back and make plays with athleticism, it just doesn't feel like outside of Bam, the Heat have a lot of players that are making defensive plays athletically that can change the game. I think that could be really helpful. And if that guy can also score 18 points a game the way that Dejounte Murray can and make shots and do these things, obviously that helps. Like we were talking about earlier, you need a 2-way threat. You need a guy who could start and end games. I think Dejounte Murray is kind of that guy. Now, what is it going to cost? I wouldn't give up Tyler Hero, obviously. I'm not sure I'm even giving up both. I'm not giving up both first-round picks. I'm not. Would I give up one? Would I give up the 2028? Could I get it protected? Top 5, top 6, something like that? Am I willing to trade Kyle Lowry in that deal? Does Atlanta ask for something more like a Duncan Robinson? Am I willing to go that far? These are tough questions that the Heat would have to answer. Obviously, I think you start with Lowry. He's on an expiring contract. I don't know that he's been coming back next year anyway. If you could find a long-term answer at the position, I think you have to do it. And if you think Dejounte Murray could be a long-term answer, not just for this year, and I think he would be helpful this year, but obviously a guy who can age with Bam and Tyler Hero also, maybe that's something you do. And if you would have asked me a couple of weeks ago, what's Miami's biggest, if they had to make a trade, what are you targeting? I was sort of in the camp of go find your starting long-term answer at power forward, because it's just sort of been a Band-Aid solution over the last couple of years. But now I'm thinking that they need to go and address the perimeter defense, and specifically a guy who could defend other ball handlers and other wings at a high level and in a playoff setting. We haven't seen it a ton from Dejounte Murray lately. It is a name that I would be kicking the tires on if I were the Miami Heat. Not sure I would go fully into it and do it, but it's a name now that I'm thinking a lot more about than I was even a couple of weeks ago. And I think the Heat, when they're looking at their options before February, if they really want to make a run at this thing, again, not to overreact to one game or even these 2 losses in a row, but there's some real concerns here. And you got to get these guys back from injury and see what this looks like when it's whole. But the trade deadline is only a month and a half away. And whether or not they make a deal or not, that's a different thing. But these are conversations that this front office really have to have in a serious way. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel.